The Black Genocide in Zimbabwe, Colonial Violence by White Settlers. Zimbabwe is a country rich in land, culture, and history. It was once the seat of a powerful Great Zimbabwe Empire, but from the late 1800s through the 20th century, it became the site of one of Africa's most brutal settler regimes, known as Southern Rhodesia. This is the story of how white settlers dispossessed, displaced, and destroyed Black Zimbabweans, not just through overt violence, but through systemic oppression that fits the definition of cultural and structural genocide. Colonization and land theft. In 1890, British colonists under Cecil John Rhodes and the British South Africa Company invaded and claimed Mashonaland and later Matabeleland, the heart of what is now known as Zimbabwe. By 1895, the region was named Southern Rhodesia. "The natives are like children, they need to be ruled by us," said Cecil John Rhodes. By 1914, the Land Apportionment Acts gave white settlers, only 5% of the population, control over 50% of the arable land. Meanwhile, millions of Black Zimbabweans were confined to native reserves, overcrowded, infertile areas, lacking in water and infrastructure. This was economic and cultural genocide by design. The first Chimurenga. In 1896, the Shona and Ndebele people rose up in what became known as the First Chimurenga, or War of Liberation. Over 8,000 African fighters and civilians were killed. British and settler forces crushed the rebellion with modern weaponry and mass executions. Spirit mediums like Mbuya Nehanda were executed, including by public hanging. This was more than a failed revolt. It was a fight for survival. Forced labor and taxation. To force Africans into colonial labor, white settlers imposed head taxes, hut taxes, and dog taxes, payable only in British currency. If Africans didn't want to work on settler farms or mines, they couldn't pay. Forced labor, often for pennies, became widespread, especially in mines and tobacco farms. This system created a cycle of dependence, poverty, and exploitation, while enriching the white minority. Displacement and dehumanization. Black Zimbabweans were prohibited from owning land in most regions, barred from voting or holding political office, and often subjected to pass laws, movement restrictions, and police brutality. By 1952, 6,000 white settlers owned over 18 million hectares of land, while 3.5 million Black Africans were squeezed into just 8 million hectares. This was not just economic injustice. It was an attempt to eliminate African autonomy and identity. The Second Chimurenga and White Terror. In 1965, white settlers declared unilateral independence from Britain under Ian Smith, forming the racist state of Rhodesia. Smith's regime was determined to maintain white minority rule at all costs and brutally suppressed any Black resistance. During the Second Chimurenga from 1966 to 1979, also called the Zimbabwe Liberation War, Rhodesian forces bombed villages, used napalm, and committed mass killings of civilians. Torture, sexual harm, and chemical weapons were used against suspected liberation fighters. An estimated 20,000 to 30,000 Black Zimbabweans died in the war. In rural areas, whole communities were forcibly relocated into protected villages, which were more like concentration camps. The Rhodesian army also worked with apartheid South Africa, and both received covert support from Western powers during the Cold War. Was it genocide? While the word genocide typically evokes images of death camps or gas chambers, it also includes systematic destruction of people's way of life, displacement and starvation, suppression of language, culture, and sovereignty, and killing members of a group with the intent to destroy. By these standards, the actions of the Rhodesian settler regime constitute genocide, both cultural and structural, and at times physical. Zimbabwe finally won independence in 1980, and Robert Mugabe became the first prime minister. But the legacy of settler colonialism was far from over. Over 70% of the arable land still remained in the hands of white commercial farmers well into the 1990s. Deep poverty, inequality, and racial divisions continued. The land reform movement in the 2000s, while controversial and violent, was an attempt to correct a century of theft and terror. The genocide against Black Zimbabweans didn't happen in one moment. It happened over decades through land theft, forced labor, racial laws, and military terror. White settlers came not to coexist, but to dominate. And while Zimbabwe is now a Black majority-ruled state, the scars of colonization run deep in its land, its economy, and its psyche. To understand Zimbabwe today, we must confront the history head-on and name it for what it was. As always, thank you for watching. If you found this topic important, please like, share, and comment. And most importantly, subscribe. History is political, and silence is complicity. Thank you.